Disrespect is not just an emotional reaction, it's a social message. When someone is disrespected, what's being communicated is not simply dislike or disagreement, but disqualification. It says you don't count. You don't matter here, your presence is incidental. For many young men today, that message cuts deeper than we often acknowledge. In fact, disrespect may be the defining emotional experience of too many boys and men growing up in contemporary society. And while we may urge them to forget everything else, that particular wound, that specific moment of being dismissed or degraded tends to linger. It becomes the reference point, a scar that sets. Now, this isn't to excuse bad behavior or to glorify grievance, but we must recognize what disrespect actually does in the context of a fragile identity. For those already feeling left behind in school, in relationships, in the workplace, a single act of disrespect isn't isolated, it reverberates. It confirms a fear that they are, in fact, unnecessary, that the world has moved on, and that their role in it is undefined, unacknowledged, or obsolete. If you're a young man who struggles in school, perhaps never praised for academic excellence, and who doesn't see a clear path forward into college or a respected trade, what do you hold on to? If your father is absent or your mentors are scarce, who teaches you where your value lies? When the culture you live in is increasingly uncomfortable, even discussing the idea of positive masculinity, when you're unsure whether being a man is something to celebrate or apologize for, what kind of self-impeach are you left with? And then when you are mocked or dismissed or treated as invisible, that becomes more than just a painful moment. It becomes a kind of proof. What's particularly dangerous about this is that disrespect feels like a judgment you can't argue with. It doesn't invite dialogue. It doesn't ask for your side of the story. It shuts you down. And in that silence, resentment grows. Because it's not simply that someone was rude to you, it's that you were made to feel like you have no rightful place. That kind of social disqualification is profoundly destabilizing, especially when it happens at scale, especially when it happens early. We're witnessing a generation of boys who are less likely to graduate, more likely to be suspended, far less likely to be mentored, and more likely to fall behind in social and emotional development. When these boys are disrespected by teachers, by peers, by institutions, it's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's the quiet exclusion, the lack of expectations, the shrug of indifference. That, too, is a form of disrespect, and perhaps the most corrosive kind, because it masquerades as neutrality. But kids know. They know when no one expects them to thrive, and they remember. We have to understand this, not just as a matter of individual psychology, but as a societal issue, because the way we distribute respect, who gets it, who has to earn it, who gets it automatically, is deeply embedded in our culture. If boys grow up in environments where respect feels out of reach, unless it's seized by force or fear, then they will either go silent or go loud. They'll disappear into isolation, or they'll lash out in ways that demand attention, even if it's negative. The real tragedy here is that many of these boys don't want dominance, they want dignity. But they've been told implicitly that they don't deserve it, or worse, that they have to apologize for wanting it. So when someone finally acknowledges them, even if that someone is a toxic peer group or an online echo chamber or a subculture built around grievance, they listen, because that voice, however flawed, recognizes them, actually sees them, respects them, at least in a twisted way. That's the power of remembered disrespect. It becomes the lens through which every new experience is filtered. Is this person going to disrespect me too? Is this another space where I'll be judged as less? This is not just about feelings, it's about futures. Because when young men internalize disrespect, they carry it into adulthood, into relationship, into the workplace, into fatherhood. And unless that cycle is interrupted, it reproduces itself. Boys become men who don't trust institutions, who struggle to express vulnerability, who either retreat into passivity or explode in anger, all because they were told, explicitly or not, that they didn't matter, and they never forgot. So while we can talk about programs and policies, about education reform and mentorship and job training, we also have to talk about something deeper and harder, the need for recognition. The need to see boys and men as worthy of respect, not because they're perfect, but because they're human, because they carry the weight of expectation, fear, hope, and failure just like anyone else. We can't heal what we refuse to see, and we can't rebuild what we won't first acknowledge was broken. Disrespect is not just a wound, it's a message, and too many have received it loud and clear. Let me tell you something about the way young men navigate the world today. It's not just about what they do or don't have. It's about how they're seen. Respect, for many of them, is not a luxury or a social bonus. It's the core of how they measure their worth in a world that seems to have lost the vocabulary to affirm them. And this is crucial. Masculine identity, in particular, is incredibly fragile when respect is absent. It's not about being praised. It's not about ego. It's about being recognized, seen as someone who matters. Now, consider a teenage boy in school who's struggling. He's not performing well academically. Perhaps he's disruptive. Maybe he's skipping class. What's really going on? Too often we look at the behavior and ignore the driver behind it. This young man may already feel that the system doesn't care about him, that he's disposable, that there is no place for him in the future being built around him. The disrespect he perceives, sometimes subtle, sometimes blunt, is not just from authority figures, it's cultural, it's structural, it's in the tone of media, in classroom discipline policies, in the silent assumptions that others carry about him. And over time, this perceived disrespect hardens. And what happens when a young man concludes that nothing he does will be met with real respect? He withdraws, or he lashes out, or he finds communities online or otherwise that feed on grievance and disdain. You see, the impulse to remember the disrespect is not irrational. It's a coping mechanism. It's what you hold on to when everything else, ambition, hope, trust, has slipped away. We have told boys that their respect must be earned, but we fail to notice that we've moved the goalpost on them. The traditional roots, being a provider, being physically strong, being stoic, those have been discredited or even mocked in many circles. But we haven't given them a clear, accessible path to new forms of masculine worth. We've left them in an ideological no man's land, expected to reject the old roles, but given no map to navigate the new terrain. And when a person has no map, they rely on memory. And often that memory is of the moment they were disrespected, discounted, or dismissed. I'm not making excuses for bad behavior. I'm making a case for deeper understanding. We are social beings. And for boys and men especially, respect is the oxygen of self-worth. It's the feedback loop that says, I see you and you have value. Without it, the psyche struggles to find balance. The emotional immune system weakens. That's when we see depression, addiction, disengagement. That's when we see a search for belonging that veers toward the dangerous or the destructive. What's striking is how many men I've spoken to, even those who seem outwardly successful, carry with them a formative memory of being disrespected by a parent, a teacher, a coach, a peer. And that memory becomes foundational. It's not that they haven't achieved anything since, it's that the wound was never addressed, never named. And in the absence of naming, it festers. It shapes how they trust, how they compete, how they connect. The paradox is this. The more we dismiss the importance of respect in a young man's development, the more we ensure that he will center his identity around moments of disrespect. We tell him to forget it, to move on, to grow up, but the message he receives is that his experience doesn't matter. And if his experience doesn't matter, maybe he doesn't either. So, no, it's not petty when someone can't let go of the disrespect. It's primal. It's about the need for recognition. The tragedy is that we've become so clumsy, so awkward in talking about the legitimate needs of boys and men that we leave them to seek meaning in the shadows, in resentment, in refusal, and often in withdrawal. That is why we need a cultural shift, not in favor of ego stroking, but in favor of intentional, dignified engagement. We need to stop acting as if respect is a trophy handed out at the end and start seeing it as a starting point, a prerequisite for growth. Not because young men are entitled to it unconditionally, but because without it, they may never develop the internal scaffolding required to earn it through character and contribution. Let's not be naive. The world doesn't owe anyone respect, But society does owe young people a chance to earn it in ways that feel real and achievable. We need to cultivate environments where boys are challenged, yes, but also affirmed, where they are held accountable, but also heard. Because when we ignore their need for respect, we sow seeds of bitterness. And when we acknowledge that need with compassion and clarity, we plant something much stronger: resilience, purpose, and the will to contribute. If we continue to treat masculine identity as something to be deconstructed rather than something to be rebuilt, we should not be surprised when the next generation of men remember only the moments they were diminished. They'll forget everything except the disrespect. It's a strange thing how memory works. We're all encouraged to move on, to be the bigger person, to let go of the past. And yet, what is it that tends to cling the longest? It's not the praise, not the encouragement, not the gentle hand on the shoulder telling us we did a good job. No, it's the moment someone looked to us. It's the laugh that cut a little too deep. It's the dismissal, the eye roll, the cold shoulder. It's disrespect. Disrespect stays. And it stays for a reason. There is something primal, deeply rooted in our evolutionary biology that makes us hold on to moments where we are shamed, slighted, or publicly undermined. It's not a character flaw. It's survival instinct, historically. Being disrespected in a group meant being marginalized. In some societies, it meant banishment. In others, it meant vulnerability to physical harm, or at least to irrelevance. So our brains evolved to keep score, to stay alert, to not forget, because to forget might mean to let it happen again. So we remember, not out of weakness, but out of a subconscious effort to self-protect. Now apply this to young men today, boys who grow up being told they're either dangerous or dispensable, men who feel like their contribution is constantly questioned or worse, unnecessary. Every moment of perceived disrespect doesn't land in a vacuum. It lands in a context where self-worth is already tenuous. So when you tell a young man to forget everything but remember the disrespect, you don't have to repeat yourself. He already has. He's been doing it his whole life. This is not a justification for bitterness. It's an explanation of behavior, and behavior matters because it becomes culture. It becomes grievance culture. You see it online. You see it in certain corners of political rhetoric. A sense of brooding anger, a hunger for revenge narratives, a fixation on dignity lost. That fixation didn't emerge from nowhere. It emerged from the accumulation of moments of being belittled, misunderstood, sidelined. What's dangerous is that these moments of disrespect begin to overtake the full narrative because neurologically they are louder, more vivid. The brain flags them as urgent. And so a man can receive 100 compliments, a dozen helping hands, a few lifelines tossed his way, and still walk away remembering the one time he was told he was nothing. And then that memory becomes the lens, a distorting lens. It filters out the good. It filters out the hopeful, and it begins to define his identity. That's why we have to be especially careful about what we reward culturally. We often elevate quick wit, sarcasm, domination in debates. We mistake humiliation for humor. But when young men see that what earns social points is disrespecting others, what lesson do we think they're learning? Conversely, when they are on the receiving end, what lesson do they think we're teaching? We tell them, don't take it personally. But for many, it is personal because the institutions around them aren't offering many other messages of value or place. So yes, they take it personally and they remember. I've sat with boys in alternative education programs, boys who've been kicked out of mainstream schools. They'd shrug and say, I don't care. But then you'd push a little, listen a little more. And what comes out time and again is the memory of being humiliated in class, a teacher's comment, classmates' joke, a suspension that felt less like justice and more like exile. Those moments live rent-free in their minds, and those memories often shape the next decision they make, not the positive reinforcement they once got from a mentor or a parent. This is why restoring respect is so critical, not just in big political or policy conversations, but in the daily human interactions that shape identity. Disrespect is sticky, but respect, when it's real and consistent, can be just as enduring. It just takes more time to build and more commitment to offer. And here's the hard truth. You can't program respect into someone's life. You have to model it, show them what it looks like, show them how it's earned, and how it's given even before it's earned as a baseline of human dignity. So yes, disrespect lingers, and maybe it always will. But what if we could balance the scales? What if, alongside the memory of shame, we embedded memories of being seen, being valued, being trusted? Those are just as powerful, but they require intentionality. They require that we, as a culture, stop glamorizing cynicism and start investing in empathy, not in a sentimental way, but in a rigorous, everyday practice of respect. Because if we don't, the disrespect will continue to echo louder than anything else. And for too many boys and men, it will become the only thing they remember. And that, in the end, shapes who they become. When we tell boys and young men to forget everything but remember the disrespect, we're walking a very fine line, one that can lead all too easily to the cultivation of what I would call grievance masculinity. This is not just a casual emotional reaction. It's a worldview, a framework through which every experience is filtered. It's the sense that the world is stacked against you, that the institutions around you are indifferent or hostile, and that the only thing you're allowed to hold on to, the only thing you're encouraged to hold on to, is the memory of being wronged. Grievance masculinity is dangerous, not just because it leads to anger or withdrawal, but because it becomes a substitute for genuine identity. It's not about what a man is, what he has built, who he's become. It's about what was taken from him, who didn't respect him, how he was overlooked. And once that mindset sets in, it feeds itself. Every new challenge becomes proof of bias. Every moment of discomfort is recast as evidence of persecution. The risk here is that we raise a generation of men not aiming for excellence, contribution, or growth, but grasping tightly to an internal ledger of slights and perceived injustices. Of course, the disrespect is real. I'm not diminishing that. Many boys and men do feel left behind in school, in the labor market, in family life. They're not imagining it. They're watching themselves fall behind in educational attainment, seeing fewer and fewer pathways to meaningful, respected work, and often growing up in communities where male role models are absent. And in some cases, the way we talk about gender, power, and privilege fails to acknowledge these realities. That breeds resentment. If a young man feels like his struggles are not just ignored, but actively dismissed or invalidated, he naturally starts to retreat. And when he retreats, he doesn't retreat into nothingness. He retreats into the one thing he is allowed to feel, the disrespect. That's the origin of grievance masculinity. It doesn't start with hatred or hostility. It starts with neglect. It starts when young men aren't given a path to constructive respect, when they're told what they shouldn't be, but not what they can be. And so they begin to organize their identities not around responsibility or contribution or purpose, but around perceived disrespect. The problem, of course, is that this identity is inherently reactive. It can't lead anywhere. It just loops back on itself. And here's the painful irony. The more a young man centers his identity on grievance, the harder it becomes for others to give him genuine respect. Why? Because true respect is earned through action, through developing competence, taking responsibility, showing up for others. But a man stuck in grievance masculinity is so fixated on what was denied to him that he struggles to do the very things that would earn the respect he craves. He's caught in a kind of psychological trap, demanding something he believes he's owed while avoiding the behaviors that would actually generate it. There are spaces, online especially, where this grievance is not just accepted, but celebrated. Forums, influencers, entire subcultures are built around male resentment. They offer belonging, yes. They offer narrative clarity, yes, but they do so by hardening the memory of disrespect into identity. That's not liberation, that's captivity. And it's profoundly unattractive, not just to others, but to the men themselves deep down. Because no one truly wants to live as a permanent victim. We all want to be the authors of our own stories, not just the subjects of other people's rejection. We need to give young men something better, not to coddle them, not to validate every grievance, but to offer them a real alternative, a chance to become respected through discipline, through competence, through service. That means changing the institutions around them, yes, schools, workplaces, families, but also changing the messages we send them about what kind of man is worthy of respect. It's not enough to tell them, Forget everything but the disrespect. We must tell them what to remember. Remember your capacity, remember your agency, remember that the path to dignity runs through action, not reaction. If we don't, the vacuum will be filled by voices that prey on their pain and offer them nothing but bitterness in return. We can do better than that. We must do better than that, because when we build a culture that remembers only disrespect, we don't just lose the past, we forfeit the future. And that's a future we can't afford to lose. We often tell young men to earn respect, as if the phrase alone is self-explanatory, as if the mere repetition of those two words, earn and respect, will unlock some latent moral compass, some internalized map to dignity and worth. But what we fail to appreciate again and again is that earning respect requires more than effort. It requires guidance. It requires a scaffold, a framework, a culture that teaches what genuine respect even looks like and where it comes from. Crucial moment in a fallen, we act as though the path is obvious, when in fact it's increasingly obscured. Many boys grow up in environments where models of respectable manhood are scarce, contradictory, or outright absent. Their fathers might not be present, or if they are, they may not be engaged. Their schools may reward compliance over competence. Their peers may confuse fear with respect. And the media they consume too often glorifies domination rather than decency. In such a context, telling a boy to earn respect without providing a working definition or viable path is like telling someone to win a game without explaining the rules. Let me put it plainly. If we want young men to seek out and live lives that command real respect, we need to show them how. Not with lectures, but with presence, with examples, with an institutional and interpersonal culture that doesn't just punish failure, but nurtures capacity. Too often we judge young men for not reaching a standard we've done very little to help them prepare for. We critique the symptoms without treating the cause. It's easy to say that respect is earned through hard work, discipline, integrity, and that's not wrong. But the development of those traits is not automatic. It is taught, it is modeled, and it is almost always relational. A boy doesn't learn discipline in isolation. He learns it when someone invests in him, expects something of him, walks beside him, through trial and error. Integrity doesn't spring from a vacuum. It's developed in moments where honesty is rewarded, not punished. Hard work doesn't become meaningful unless there's a reason to work hard, something or someone to work for. One of the biggest challenges right now is that many boys don't feel that their effort matters. They're not sure who's watching, who's counting, or if it makes any difference at all. In the absence of a meaningful goal, effort can feel futile, and without effort, there's nothing to respect, not even from oneself. This is how the cycle perpetuates. We want men to be respectable, but we give them fewer and fewer places to learn how to get there. So yes, respect must be earned, but we can't stop there. We have to ask, who's teaching them to earn it? What are we showing them? Are we providing opportunities for responsibility? Are we acknowledging progress even when it's incomplete? Are we giving young men a sense that their effort has purpose, that their development is seen and valued? If not, then what we're really doing is withholding respect while offering no ladder to reach it. I've spent a lot of time talking to young men on campuses, in workshops, sometimes just across a coffee table. And one theme that comes up again and again is a hunger not for praise, but for recognition, to be seen trying, to be acknowledged not because they've already succeeded, but because they are attempting to be better. There is a deep, often unspoken desire to matter. And when that desire is met with nothing but criticism or apathy, it hardens, it turns into anger or withdrawal or nihilism. That's why we need to treat respect not just as a reward, but as a relational currency, something that grows when shared, when exchanged. It doesn't mean lowering standards. It means investing early and often. It means creating spaces, schools, communities, homes, where boys are expected to grow, but also supported in doing so, where they are allowed to fail without being written off, where they can take on responsibility and see that responsibility acknowledged. And make no mistake, respect is transformative. When a boy experiences true respect, not fear-based submission, not transactional approval, but the deep sense that someone sees potential in him and holds him to it, it changes the trajectory of his life. He begins to see himself differently. He starts to measure himself against a higher standard because someone showed him what that standard looks like and believed he could reach it. And we are failing, not because young men are incapable of earning respect, but because we've stopped teaching them how. We've stopped inviting them into the process. And in that void, other narratives fill the space. Narratives of dominance, of vengeance, of proving worth through violence or rejection. Those narratives are dangerous, but they are seductive precisely because they offer a distorted form of respect. And if we don't offer a better one, we shouldn't be surprised when boys reach for what's available. So yes, respect must be earned. But let's not pretend the path is obvious. Let's not pretend the tools are equally available. And above all, let's not forget that boys and men rise when they are shown how, when they are believed in, when they are held to account with care. If we want them to become men worthy of respect, we have to meet them long before they get there. Because telling someone to forget everything but remember the disrespect only works if we first show them how to rise above it. Disrespect cannot be erased by silence. That's something we need to confront honestly. In so many of our public conversations about men, about masculinity, about social inequality, there's an underlying desire to quickly move on, to smooth over the discomfort, to focus on outcomes and data and policy levers without first acknowledging the emotional landscape that so many young men are navigating. But here's the truth. You cannot build anything stable on a foundation that hasn't been recognized. You cannot construct a new sense of purpose if the pain of humiliation or exclusion has simply been brushed aside. Healing doesn't come from pretending the past doesn't matter. It comes from knowing it mattered and learning to walk forward with that knowledge. When a young man says, "I remember the disrespect," he's not just recalling a rude interaction or a bad day. Often he's expressing a deeper truth about feeling unseen, unheard, or irrelevant in a world that seems to have moved on without him. Maybe it was in the classroom where he struggled to keep up and was told he just wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe it was in the workplace where he was passed over, dismissed, or replaced. Maybe it was at home in a fractured family where no one ever modeled what respect between men even looked like. These experiences don't evaporate with time. They settle in the psyche, they form narratives, and if we don't give young men the language or space to process those narratives, they harden into resentment. Too often our response is to say, "Don't dwell on it, let it go, be stronger." But that message can be toxic because it offers no tools for how to actually do that. It implies that the very fact of remembering is weakness. But remembering is human, and more than that, it's necessary. Because without remembrance, there can be no reckoning, and without reckoning, no growth. Now, let me be clear. This isn't an argument for wallowing in grievance. It's not an invitation to build identity around being wronged. That path leads nowhere good. We've seen what happens when grievance becomes a worldview, cynicism, alienation, sometimes violence. But what I'm talking about is something deeper, more constructive. I'm talking about recognition, about the simple but powerful act of saying, yes, something happened. It mattered, it hurt, and you are not alone in that. One of the most underestimated forces in a boy's development is having someone say, "I see you." That kind of attention, respectful, steady, honest, is a form of emotional oxygen. It doesn't mean coddling. It doesn't mean excusing poor behavior or lowering standards. Quite the opposite. It means setting expectations high, but also offering the support and acknowledgement that make meeting